the window, her small face pressed against the glass like a prayer against cold stone. And I remember thinking how the fluorescent lights inside made everything look harsh and unforgiving while she remained soft and blurred in the November rain that had been falling since morning. She couldn't have been more than 8 or 9. This girl with tangled brown hair that hung in wet strings around her shoulders. And she wore a jacket that was too big and too thin for the Chicago wind that cut through the streets like a blade through paper. I had been working at Rosie's Diner for 3 years then. Ever since the factory closed and took my father's job with it. Ever since my mother started spending her days staring at the television with the sound turned down low, and her hands folded in her lap like she was waiting for something that would never come. The diner sat on the corner of Ashland and Division, wedged between a check-cashing place and a laundromat where the washing machines hummed their broken songs all day and all night. And I had grown to love the way the place smelled of bacon grease and coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner, the way the vinyl booths cracked inside when customers slid across them, the way the neon sign flickered and buzzed with a persistence that felt almost hopeful. The girl stood there for maybe 10 minutes, just watching us through the window, watching me stack plates and pour coffee for the afternoon regulars who came in to escape the cold and the loneliness of their empty apartments. And I watched her too, the way she shifted from foot to foot, the way she wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something inside that wanted to spill out onto the sidewalk. There was something about her stillness that reminded me of my sister Sarah before she got sick, the way Sarah used to stand in doorways and observe the world with those wide eyes that seemed to see everything and understand more than she should have. And I felt that familiar ache in my chest, the one that came whenever I remembered how Sarah used to count the buttons on my shirt when she was scared, how she used to say that as long as she could count to 10, everything would be okay. The lunch rush had ended and the dinner crowd hadn't started yet, so it was just me and Frank, the cook, who had been working at Rosie's since before I was born and who knew the rhythm of the place like a heartbeat, steady and reliable and somehow comforting in its predictability. Frank was stirring a pot of chili that would sit on the stove until closing time, and he was humming something under his breath, some old song that my grandmother used to sing when she thought no one was listening, and the sound mixed with the rain against the windows and the distant hum of traffic to create a kind of lullaby that made me think of safety and warmth, and all the things that girl outside probably hadn't felt in a long time. When she finally pushed through the door, the little bell above it chimed like a question mark, and she stood there dripping on the black and white checkered floor, her eyes darting around the room like a bird looking for a place to land. She was smaller than I had thought, this girl, smaller and more fragile. And her shoes were worn through at the toes, the kind of shoes that had walked too many miles on too many different streets, and I could see that her socks were wet and her jeans were rolled up at the cuffs like she had been trying to keep them out of the puddles that gathered in the low places of the city. She approached the counter slowly, her hands shoved deep in the pockets of that oversized jacket. And when she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper, rough and uncertain like she hadn't used it in a while, and she said, "Excuse me, ma'am." And I realized she was talking to me, this girl who was young enough to be my daughter if I had ever had one, calling me ma'am like I was someone important, someone who mattered, and I felt something shift inside me, something that had been sleeping for a long time. "Can I help you, honey?" I asked, and the word honey came out automatically, the way it always did when I talked to children, the way it had when I talked to Sarah, and I saw something flicker in the girl's eyes. Something that might have been hope or might have been fear, and she looked down at her feet and then back up at me, and I could see that she was gathering courage from somewhere deep inside herself. "I was wondering," she said, and then she stopped and took a breath, and I could see her chest rise and fall under that thin jacket, and she tried again. "I was wondering if maybe I could have some of your leftovers, the food you're going to throw away anyway. I mean, I don't have any money, but I haven't eaten since yesterday and I thought maybe." Her voice trailed off and she looked at me with those eyes that were too old for her face, eyes that had seen things no child should see. And I felt something crack open inside my chest, something that had been sealed up tight since Sarah died, since the day I held her hand in the hospital, and felt it go cold and still in mine. And I realized that this girl was asking me for something that I could give, something simple and basic and necessary. And that maybe in giving it to her I might find something I had lost. Frank had stopped stirring his chili and was watching us. And I could feel his eyes on my back, warm and encouraging. And I knew that he would understand whatever decision I made. That he had probably seen this scene played out 100 times before in all the years he had been working here. All the years he had been feeding people who were hungry and desperate and alone. And I looked at this girl with her wet hair and her worn shoes and her brave, frightened face. And I thought about Sarah and how she used to save half her sandwich for later. How she always worried there wouldn't be enough. How she never quite believed that tomorrow would bring another meal. Another chance, another day. "What's your name, sweetheart?" I asked, and she looked surprised, like no one had asked her that question in a long time. Like she had forgotten that she was a person with a name and a story and a life that mattered. And she said, "Emma." And the name hung in the air between us like a gift, like something precious that she was entrusting to me. And I felt the weight of that trust, the responsibility of it. And I knew that whatever happened next would change something, would shift the balance of the world in some small but important way. "Well, Emma," I said, and I could hear my own voice getting softer, more gentle, the way it used to sound when I talked to Sarah. "I think we can do better than leftovers, don't you think, Frank?" And Frank nodded and smiled, and I saw him reach for a clean plate. And I felt something warm spreading through my chest. Something that felt like hope or like love or like the possibility that maybe, just maybe, we could save each other. This girl and me, this Emma with her wet hair and her courage and her willingness to ask for help when she needed it most. The rain continued to fall outside, tapping against the windows like fingers against glass. And the diner felt suddenly smaller and warmer, like a refuge from all the cold and difficult things in the world. And I watched Emma's face as she realized that I wasn't going to turn her away, that I wasn't going to make her feel ashamed for asking, that I was going to feed her and maybe, if she let me, take care of her in whatever way I could. And I thought about Sarah and how she used to say that angels came disguised as ordinary people, how they showed up when you needed them most. And I wondered if maybe Emma was my angel, or if maybe, just maybe, I was hers. I led her to the booth in the corner. The one where the vinyl wasn't cracked and the table wasn't sticky. The one where the afternoon light came in soft and golden through the window. And I brought her a glass of water and watched her drink it slowly, carefully, like she was afraid it might disappear if she wasn't careful. And I thought about all the things I wanted to ask her. All the questions that crowded in my throat like birds trying to escape. But I didn't ask them because I could see that she was tired, bone-deep tired. The kind of tired that comes from carrying too much weight for too long. And I thought that maybe what she needed more than questions was just someone to sit with her. Someone to be present while she ate and rested and felt safe. At least for a little while. Frank brought out a plate of meatloaf and mashed potatoes. Green beans that were still steaming. A dinner roll with butter melting on top. And Emma stared at it like she couldn't quite believe it was real. Like she was afraid to touch it in case it vanished. And I wanted to tell her that it was okay, that she could eat as much as she wanted, that there was more where that came from. But instead I just sat across from her and watched her take that first careful bite, and then another, and then another, and I saw some of the tension leave her shoulders, some of the wariness fade from her eyes. And I felt something settle in my chest, something that felt like peace, like coming home after a long journey to a place I had almost forgotten existed. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside, the diner hummed with its familiar sounds, the coffee maker gurgling, the refrigerator humming, Frank moving around the kitchen with his sure, steady movements, and Emma ate her dinner slowly and carefully, like she wanted to make it last, like she wanted to remember every bite, every flavor, every moment of feeling full and warm and safe. And I sat there watching her and thinking about how sometimes the most important things we do are the simplest ones. How sometimes saving someone's life is as easy as putting food on a plate and sitting with them while they eat it. How sometimes love looks like nothing more than paying attention, being present, showing up when it matters most. When she finished eating, Emma looked up at me and said, "Thank you." And her voice was different now, stronger somehow, more sure of itself. And I could see that something had shifted in her. Some part of her that had been holding its breath was finally able to exhale. And I felt tears gathering in my eyes, tears that I had been holding back for months, maybe years, and I realized that in feeding her, in caring for her, I had somehow begun to heal something in myself, something that had been broken since Sarah died, something that I had thought was lost forever. "You don't have to thank me," I said, and I reached across the table and touched her hand. And her skin was warm now, warmer than it had been when she first came in. And I thought about how touch could be a kind of medicine. How sometimes the most healing thing we can do for someone is simply to let them know they're not alone, that they matter, that they're seen and valued and worthy of care. And Emma didn't pull her hand away. And I took that as a sign that maybe, just maybe, she was beginning to trust me, beginning to believe that I wasn't going to hurt her or abandon her, or make her feel small and invisible the way the world had been doing for however long she had been living on the streets. The afternoon was fading into evening, and soon the dinner crowd would start arriving, the regulars who came in after work, tired and hungry and looking for something warm and familiar to end their day. And I knew that I would have to make some decisions soon. Decisions about what to do with Emma, where she would sleep tonight, how I could help her in ways that went beyond just giving her a meal. And I felt the weight of that responsibility, but also the lightness of it, the way it felt good to have someone to care about again. Someone who needed me in the way that Sarah had needed me, in the way that I had needed to be needed. But for now, in this moment, with the rain falling outside and the diner warm and quiet around us, with Emma's hand still under mine and her plate empty and her eyes brighter than they had been when she first walked through the door, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing exactly what I was supposed to be doing, and that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. The story was just beginning. I realized Emma's story and mine. And I didn't know where it would lead us or what challenges we would face or how we would find our way through the maze of bureaucracy and social services, and all the complicated systems that were supposed to help children like Emma but so often failed them. But I knew that whatever came next, we would face it together. This girl who had been brave enough to ask for help, and this woman who had been waiting, without even knowing it, for someone to save. That first night, after I locked up the diner and the last customer had disappeared into the cold Chicago darkness, I stood there looking at Emma, who had fallen asleep in the corner booth, her head pillowed on her arms, her breathing slow and steady and peaceful in a way that made me think she hadn't slept peacefully in a very long time. And I knew I couldn't just wake her up and send her back out into the street, back to whatever doorway or alley or abandoned building she had been calling home, back to the kind of loneliness that eats away at you from the inside, until you forget what it feels like to be warm and safe and cared for. I called my landlord, Mrs. Chun, who lived in the apartment above the diner, and who had always been kind to me in the 3 years I had been renting the small studio behind the kitchen. And I explained the situation as best I could, my voice shaking with exhaustion and something that might have been hope, and she listened without interrupting, the way people do when they understand that some stories can't be rushed, that some decisions can't be made with logic alone. And when I finished talking, she was quiet for a long moment. And then she said, "The girl can stay." And I felt something loosen in my chest, something that had been wound tight since the moment Emma first appeared at the window. The next few days passed in a blur of phone calls and forms and meetings with social workers who asked questions I didn't know how to answer, questions about my income and my background and my intentions, questions that seemed designed to find reasons why I shouldn't be allowed to help this child who had no one else, no family or friends or safe place to go. And I found myself getting angry in a way I hadn't been angry since Sarah died. Angry at the system that made it so hard to do the right thing, so complicated to show kindness to someone who needed it desperately. But Emma was patient through all of it, patient and quiet and grateful in a way that broke my heart. The way she would ask permission before touching anything. The way she would eat only half of whatever I put in front of her and try to save the rest for later. The way she would wake up in the middle of the night and check to make sure I was still there, still willing to let her stay, still believing that she was worth saving, and slowly, over those first weeks, I began to understand the depth of what she had been through, the kind of neglect and abandonment that leave scars you can't see, but that shape everything about how you move through the world. She told me about her mother in fragments, small pieces of memory that she would share when she felt safe enough, when the apartment was quiet and warm, and the outside world felt far away. How her mother had been sick for a long time. Sick with something that made her sleep all day and stay awake all night. Something that made her forget to buy groceries or pay the rent or pick Emma up from school. How they had moved from place to place, staying with friends or relatives until they wore out their welcome, until there was nowhere left to go but the streets. And how her mother had disappeared one day while Emma was at the library, just gone without a word or a note or any explanation, leaving Emma to wait and wonder, and finally accept that she was truly alone. I listened to these stories and felt rage building in my chest. Rage at a mother who could abandon her child, at a system that had failed to protect her, at a world that could let a little girl slip through the cracks so completely that no one even noticed she was missing. And I wanted to promise Emma that I would never leave her, never let her down, never make her feel unwanted or unsafe again. But I had learned from Sarah's illness that some promises are too big to make, that life has a way of taking things from us whether we're ready or not. So instead I made smaller promises, daily promises, promises I could keep. I promised to feed you today. I promised to listen when you need to talk. I promised to be here when you wake up tomorrow morning. The social worker assigned to Emma's case was a tired-looking woman named Janet Morrison, who carried herself like someone who had seen too much heartbreak and learned to protect herself by expecting the worst. And she came to the diner every Tuesday afternoon to check on Emma's progress, to ask questions about her schooling and her health and her emotional state. And I could see that she was trying to do right by Emma, but she was also trying to protect the system, trying to make sure that all the proper procedures were followed, all the boxes checked, all the forms filled out in triplicate and filed in the correct order. The thing is, Janet said to me one afternoon while Emma was at school, stirring sugar into her coffee with the mechanical precision of someone who had drunk too much coffee in too many institutional settings, "We have to be careful about placement. Emma's been through a lot of trauma, and she needs stability, but she also needs someone who understands what she's been through. Someone who can handle the challenges that come with caring for a child who's been on the streets." I wanted to tell Janet that I understood trauma, that I had lived with Sarah through her illness and watched her fight and lose and finally let go, that I knew what it felt like to love someone who was fragile and afraid and carrying wounds that might never fully heal. But instead I just nodded and said, "I want to adopt her." And Janet looked at me with eyes that had heard this before, from people who meant well but didn't understand what they were signing up for, and she said, "Let's take it one step at a time." But Emma was thriving in ways that surprised everyone, including me, and I think it was because for the first time in her life she had consistency, routine, someone who showed up every day and meant what they said and followed through on their promises, no matter how small. She would wake up every morning at 7 and help me open the diner, standing on a milk crate to reach the coffee machine, counting out sugar packets and napkins with the serious concentration of someone who had learned that useful work was a form of security, a way of proving that you belong somewhere. The regulars at the diner took to her immediately, these working-class people who understood what it meant to struggle, who recognized something of themselves in this quiet girl who never complained and always said please and thank you, and who lit up when they remembered her name or asked about her day. There was Miguel, who worked construction and always ordered the same breakfast, 2 eggs over easy, hash browns, wheat toast, and who started bringing Emma books in Spanish so she could practice the language her mother had spoken but never taught her. There was Dorothy, a retired teacher who came in every afternoon for pie and coffee, and who began helping Emma with her homework, patiently explaining fractions and grammar, and the kind of basic knowledge that most children absorb gradually, but that Emma had missed during her months on the street. And there was Frank, dear Frank, who had worked at the diner for 27 years and who had never married or had children of his own, but who seemed to understand instinctively what Emma needed. The way he would let her help him prep vegetables while he told her stories about his childhood in Mississippi, about his grandmother who could make biscuits so light they practically floated off the plate, about the garden he had tended as a boy and the lessons he had learned about patience and faith, and the way good things grow slowly, with care and attention and time. It was Frank who suggested that we plant a garden behind the diner, in the small strip of earth between the building and the alley that had been nothing but weeds and broken glass for as long as anyone could remember. And Emma's face when he made the suggestion was like watching the sun come up, bright and sudden and full of possibility. And I realized that this girl who had spent months moving from place to place had never had the chance to plant something and watch it grow. Never had the luxury of believing that she would be in one place long enough to see seeds turn into flowers, into food, into something beautiful and nourishing and permanent. We spent a Saturday in March cleaning out that strip of earth, Emma and Frank and me, pulling weeds and picking up trash, and turning the soil with tools that Mrs. Chun had found in the basement. And Emma worked with an intensity that was almost fierce, like she was trying to make up for all the time she had lost, all the normal childhood experiences she had missed. And when we finally planted the first seeds, tomatoes and basil and marigolds that Frank said would keep the bugs away, Emma knelt in the dirt and patted the soil gently, like she was tucking the seeds into bed, and she whispered something I couldn't hear, some promise or prayer or wish that she made to those tiny seeds that held so much hope. School was harder for Emma than I had expected, not because she wasn't smart. She was brilliant, actually, with the kind of quick intelligence that comes from having to figure things out on your own, from having to be resourceful and observant and adaptable in ways that most children never have to be, but because she had missed so much time, so many fundamental lessons and social experiences that other kids her age took for granted. She was behind in math and reading, and she didn't know how to make friends, how to join in games at recess, how to ask for help when she needed it. And there were days when she would come home from school quiet and withdrawn, carrying some hurt that she couldn't or wouldn't explain. The principal at Emma's school was a woman named Carol Washington who had been teaching for 30 years, and who understood that some children carry invisible burdens, that some students need extra patience and understanding and time to catch up not just academically but emotionally. And she worked with Emma's teachers to create a plan that would help her succeed. Tutoring sessions and modified assignments and small group activities designed to help her build confidence and social skills, and the kind of trust in adults that she had learned, through bitter experience, was dangerous to give too freely. But slowly, gradually, Emma began to bloom. And I watched this transformation with a mixture of pride and amazement, and something that felt like wonder. The way she started raising her hand in class, the way she made her first friend, a girl named Maria who lived in the apartment building next to the diner, and who shared Emma's love of books and quiet games. The way she began to laugh more easily, more often, the sound bubbling up from some deep place that had been frozen for too long, and was finally beginning to thaw. The adoption process crawled forward with all the speed and efficiency of a three-legged turtle. Forms and interviews and background checks and home visits and meetings with lawyers and social workers and child psychologists who all seemed to have different opinions about what was best for Emma, what she needed, what I could or couldn't provide. And there were moments when I wondered if we would ever make it through the maze of bureaucracy, if the system would ever recognize what anyone who spent 5 minutes with Emma could see, that she was happy, that she was healing, that we belonged together in a way that had nothing to do with biology, and everything to do with love and choice, and the mysterious alchemy that turns strangers into family. Janet Morrison continued her weekly visits, and over the months I began to see past her professional facade to the person underneath. The woman who had gone into social work because she wanted to help children but who had been worn down by years of impossible caseloads and inadequate resources, and too many stories that didn't have happy endings. And I realized that she was rooting for us, that she wanted Emma's story to be one of the good ones, one of the cases that reminded her why she had chosen this work in the first place. "She's doing well," Janet said one Tuesday in late spring, watching Emma through the window as she watered the tomato plants that were already beginning to show tiny green fruit. Better than well, actually. Her grades are improving. Her teacher says she's participating more in class. And Dr. Martinez thinks her anxiety is much more manageable than when she first started therapy. Dr. Martinez was the child psychologist that Emma saw once a week, a gentle man with kind eyes and infinite patience who specialized in working with children who had experienced trauma. And Emma had been resistant to the idea at first, suspicious of yet another adult who wanted to ask her questions about things she preferred not to think about. But gradually she had come to trust him, to look forward to their sessions as a safe space where she could work through her fears and memories without judgment or pressure to be anything other than exactly who she was. The thing is, Janet continued, stirring her coffee and looking at me with eyes that seemed to be trying to communicate something important. The court hearing is scheduled for next month, and I believe, that the judge is going to approve the adoption. Emma's thriving here, anyone can see that. And you've done everything we've asked you to do, jumped through every hoop, filled out every form, proved that you can provide a stable, loving home. I felt tears gathering in my eyes, tears of relief and gratitude, and something that might have been disbelief, because after all these months of uncertainty, all these weeks of waiting and worrying and wondering if some bureaucrat or judge or social worker was going to decide that I wasn't good enough, wasn't qualified enough, wasn't whatever enough to be Emma's mother, it seemed almost too good to be true that we might actually make it official, that Emma might finally have the security of knowing that no one could take her away from the only stable home she had ever known. The court hearing was on a Thursday in June, and Emma wore the blue dress with the small flowers that I had bought her for Easter, and she had brushed her hair until it shone and put on the small pearl earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. And she looked so grown up, so serious and hopeful and beautiful that I had to excuse myself and cry in the bathroom for 5 minutes before I could compose myself enough to walk into that courtroom and answer the judge's questions about my intentions and my commitment, and my understanding of what it meant to be responsible for another human being's life and happiness and future. The judge was an older woman with silver hair and reading glasses that she kept on a chain around her neck. And she looked at Emma with the kind of attention that made me think she had children or grandchildren of her own, that she understood what was at stake in this moment. And when she asked Emma if she wanted to be adopted, if she wanted me to be her legal mother, Emma stood up straight and looked her in the eye and said, "Yes, Your Honor, more than anything." And her voice was clear and strong and certain in a way that made my heart swell with pride and love and gratitude for this brave, resilient girl who had survived so much and still had the courage to hope, to trust, to open her heart to the possibility of belonging somewhere forever. When the judge signed the papers and banged her gavel and declared that Emma was officially, legally, permanently my daughter, we both cried, Emma and I, right there in the courtroom in front of the lawyers and social workers and court reporters. And I held her tight and whispered in her ear, "You're home now, baby. You're home and you're safe and you're loved and nothing is ever going to change that." And she whispered back, "I love you too, Mom." And it was the first time she had ever called me that. And I felt something complete itself inside me, some circle that had been broken when Sarah died, and that I had thought would never be whole again. We celebrated that night at the diner, after closing time, with a cake that Frank had made special for the occasion. Chocolate with vanilla frosting and "Welcome Home Emma" written in pink icing. And all the regulars came, Miguel and Dorothy and Mrs. Chun and even Janet Morrison, who had never socialized with her clients before but who said she couldn't miss this particular celebration. And we ate cake and drank coffee and told stories and laughed until our sides hurt. And Emma sat in the middle of it all, glowing with happiness, surrounded by all these people who had come to love her not because they had to but because she had earned their affection with her quiet courage and her generous heart, and her willingness to let them be part of her journey from loneliness to belonging. 2 years later, I watch Emma from the kitchen window as she tends to the garden that has become her pride and joy, her hands dark with soil, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that catches the morning light. And I think about how time moves in strange ways, How 2 years can feel like a lifetime when you're learning to trust again, when you're building something new from the broken pieces of what came before. She's wearing the blue dress I bought her last month, the one with the small flowers that reminded me of the wallpaper in Sarah's room. And she's humming while she works, humming the same song Frank used to sing while he stirred his chili, and I feel that familiar warmth spreading through my chest. The one that comes when I realize that home isn't a place but a feeling, a sense of belonging that we create for each other one small gesture at a time. The garden has grown beyond anything we imagined that first spring when we planted those tentative seeds in the strip of dirt behind the diner. And now it sprawls and blooms and produces more vegetables than we know what to do with. Tomatoes and peppers and squash and herbs that Emma harvests every morning before school and arranges in baskets that we sell to customers who have come to expect this burst of color and freshness in their neighborhood diner. This unexpected beauty growing in a place where nothing beautiful was supposed to thrive. Emma is 11 now, tall for her age and confident in ways that still surprise me sometimes. And she has become the unofficial greeter at the diner. The one who remembers everyone's names and their usual orders and asks about their families and their jobs and their troubles with the kind of genuine interest that makes people feel seen and valued. And I watch her move through the dining room like she owns the place, like she has always belonged here. And I think about that scared, hungry girl who stood outside in the rain 2 years ago, and how far we have both traveled since then. She excels in school now, not just academically but socially, and she has a group of friends who come to the diner after school sometimes to do homework and eat Frank's famous cookies and plan sleepovers and birthday parties and all the normal activities of childhood that Emma had never experienced before. And I love watching her navigate these friendships with the same careful attention she brings to everything else. The way she listens to her friends' problems and offers advice with the wisdom of someone who has lived through difficulties they can't imagine. The way she includes the quiet kids and the outcasts and the ones who don't quite fit in anywhere else, because she remembers what it feels like to be invisible, to be forgotten, to be alone. Her best friend is still Maria, the girl from the apartment building next door. But she has also become close with a boy named David whose parents are divorced and who spends every other weekend at his father's apartment above the laundromat, and with a girl named Ashley whose grandmother brings her to the diner every Saturday morning for pancakes and hot chocolate, and long conversations about books and dreams, and the future that stretches ahead of them like an unwritten story waiting to be filled with adventure and possibility. Dr. Martinez still sees Emma once a month, though the sessions are different now, less about processing trauma and more about normal adolescent concerns, about school and friendships and the complicated business of growing up. And he tells me that Emma is one of his success stories, a reminder that with the right support and enough time and patience, children can heal from even the deepest wounds, can learn to trust again, to hope again, to believe that they deserve love and safety and all the good things that life has to offer. Frank officially retired 6 months ago, but he still comes in every morning to make coffee and tell jokes and dispense the kind of grandfatherly wisdom that Emma soaks up like a sponge. And he has become her mentor in the garden, teaching her about soil and seasons and the patience required to grow things properly. And I watch them working together and think about how family is something we choose as much as something we're born into. How the people who love us and care for us and show up for us day after day become our family regardless of blood or law or any other arbitrary definition. The diner itself has changed too, become brighter and more welcoming somehow. And I think it's because Emma has brought something to the place that wasn't there before, something that feels like hope, like possibility, like the belief that good things can happen to people who need them most. We've painted the walls a warm yellow that Emma chose. And we've hung up some of her artwork from school. Watercolor paintings of flowers and butterflies and sunny skies that make even the gloomiest Chicago day feel a little brighter. And we've added a small bookshelf in the corner where customers can borrow books or leave ones they've finished reading, because Emma believes that stories should be shared, that everyone deserves access to the magic and escape and understanding that books can provide. Mrs. Chun sold the building last year to a developer who wanted to tear it down and build condominiums, But when the neighborhood found out, they organized a petition and a boycott, and a letter-writing campaign that eventually convinced the city council to designate the diner as a local landmark, too important to the community to be destroyed for profit. And I think about how Emma was part of that campaign, how she stood up at a city council meeting and spoke about what the diner meant to her and to the neighborhood, how her voice was steady and clear and convincing in a way that reminded me of the girl who had stood in front of a judge 2 years earlier and declared that she wanted to be adopted, wanted to belong somewhere, wanted to have a family and a home and a future. The new owner is a man named Robert Kim who grew up in the neighborhood and who understands what the diner represents. And he has promised to keep it exactly as it is, to honor its history and its role in the community. And he has even given us a new lease at a reduced rent because he says that places like Rosie's Diner are what make neighborhoods into communities, what give people a reason to care about each other and look out for each other and remember that we're all in this together, all trying to make our way through the world with as much grace and kindness as we can manage. Emma talks about the future now in ways that take my breath away, talks about college and careers and travel, and all the dreams that stretch ahead of her like roads waiting to be explored. And she wants to be a teacher, she says, or maybe a social worker like Janet Morrison, or maybe a chef like Frank, someone who feeds people and makes them feel welcome and cared for. And I listen to her plans and feel proud and amazed and slightly terrified at how quickly she's growing up. How soon she'll be making her own choices and her own mistakes and her own discoveries about who she wants to be and what she wants to do with her life. But for now, in this moment, with the morning sun streaming through the windows and the coffee brewing and the first customers of the day starting to arrive, with Emma coming in from the garden with dirt under her fingernails and a basket full of tomatoes, and that smile that lights up the room, I feel grateful beyond measure for the journey that brought us together, for the courage it took for her to ask for help and for me to say yes, for all the small miracles and daily kindnesses that have woven themselves into this life we've built together. The bell above the door chimes as Dorothy arrives for her morning coffee and crossword puzzle, and Emma rushes over to greet her with a hug and an update on the garden, and a promise to save her a piece of the apple pie that Frank taught her to make. And I watch this interaction and think about how love grows, one day at a time, one gesture at a time, one moment of choosing to stay, to care, to hope when hope seems impossible. And I know that this is what happiness looks like. This ordinary Tuesday morning in a neighborhood diner where a woman and her daughter make coffee and serve breakfast and tend a garden and create, together, something that feels like forever. I tie my apron and pour fresh coffee and think about Sarah, who would be 26 now if she had lived, who would have loved Emma with the same fierce protectiveness that I feel, who would have been proud of us for finding each other and holding on and building something beautiful from the ashes of what we lost. And I feel her presence in the warm light that fills the diner, in the laughter that bubbles up from Emma as she chats with customers, in the sense of completeness that I carry with me now like a prayer, like a promise, like a gift that I will never take for granted. This is how love grows, I think, how families are made, how broken hearts become whole again. And I am grateful, so grateful, for the girl who had the courage to ask for help, for the chance to say yes, for the life we built together from the simple act of putting food on a plate and believing that tomorrow could be better than today, that we could be better than we were, that we could save each other and in doing so, save ourselves. And I know that whatever comes next, whatever challenges or joys or sorrows the future holds, we will face them together, this girl and me. This family we chose and created and nurtured into something strong enough to last, something beautiful enough to make the world a little brighter, a little kinder, a little more full of hope. The story continues, will always continue, because love is like that, endless and renewable and always finding new ways to surprise us. And as I watch Emma arrange flowers from the garden in mason jars to place on each table, as I see the way she moves through this space that has become our home, our refuge, our gift to each other and to everyone who walks through our door looking for warmth and welcome, and the simple human recognition that they matter, that they belong, that they are worthy of care and attention and love, I know that we have accomplished something important here, something that goes beyond the daily business of serving food and making change and keeping the lights on, something that has to do with the deepest human needs for connection and belonging and the faith that someone, somewhere, will catch us when we fall, will feed us when we're hungry, will love us when we think we're unlovable, will remind us that we are not alone, that we never have to be alone again.